The International Criminal Court at The Hague is currently hearing the matter on whether Russian President Vladimir Putin has a case to answer to at The Hague. Let's cross live to that.
Overt role in the conflict grew, and in 2018, Ukrainian legislation declared the Donbass occupied territory. Fueled by Russia, the carnage in eastern Ukraine grew. I will highlight only one example: the shelling of a residential district in Mariupol on 24 January 2015. 30 civilians died in the attack. According to the UN Secretary General, the attackers fired indiscriminately into civilian areas. The Undersecretary General for Political Affairs elaborated that they knowingly targeted a civilian population. I should add that Mariupol is a Russian-speaking city. Russia's claim to be the protectors of Russian-speaking people in Ukraine did not protect Mariupol from a barrage of Russian rockets in 2015, just as it is not protecting Mariupol today from a Russian siege army that is bombarding the city and cutting off its power, water, and heat. Madam President, members of the court, these are the circumstances in which Russia claims that Ukraine has been committing genocide against its own people. It would be an understatement to say that Russia has provided no evidence for acts of genocide in the course of this conflict. The closest President Putin has come to even explaining his allegation of genocide is to assert, as he did on 21 February of this year, that, quote, "Not a single day goes by without Donbass communities coming under shelling attacks," end quote. This is another flagrant lie for which Russia has offered no support. Shortly, Ms. Cheek will apply the definition of genocide under Article 2 of the Convention and show that no such acts have been committed. For now, I will make 3 factual points. First, Ukrainian civilians on both sides of the contact line have suffered from a conflict which Russia has funded and fueled and increasingly waged itself. Tragically, Ukraine's adversaries have had no regard to the lives of civilians on their side of the line. This is not Ukraine's position alone. It is a fact documented by the UN Human Rights Monitoring Mission. Quote, "The armed groups are locating their military assets in and conducting attacks from densely populated areas, thereby putting the whole civilian population at risk." The civilians on both sides of the line are Ukrainian, and Ukraine regards every civilian death in this conflict as a tragedy. But to claim that Ukraine targets civilians is to distort facts. As I noted a moment ago, in the course of this conflict, top UN officials condemned the DPR for knowingly targeting a residential area. You will not find anything that comes close to that about Ukraine. Second, if there were attacks on civilians rising to the level of genocide, allegedly warranting an armed invasion, one would think there must have been a massive recent escalation in civilian casualties, at the least. Yet that is transparently not the case. UN human rights monitors have tracked the year-over-year civilian casualties in the conflict. The UN statistics on your screen show a dramatic decrease. These figures, moreover, cover both sides and do not reflect any conclusion of civilians being targeted. To be clear, Ukraine regards as tragic each of the 15 deaths recorded as of the date of the most recent report in 2021. But Russia's claim that Ukraine is targeting civilians is a clear fabrication. Indeed, as recently as 22 December 2021, the OSCE announced a renewed ceasefire agreement. As further explained in a recent report by The Guardian, quote, "The OSCE logs regular firing between Moscow armed separatists and Ukrainian soldiers. In recent months, this low-level conflict has been relatively calm, as Russia has moved 150,000 troops to Ukraine's borders, and Ukrainian soldiers have been under instructions not to return fire," end quote. Third, if one point should be clear from my presentation, it is that UN human rights monitors have been meticulously tracking the conflict in Donetsk and Luhansk from its inception to the present. In 8 years of reporting, there is not a single hint of any act of genocide. The OSCE has logged every ceasefire violation, and you will not find in its reports any evidence of genocide. Ukraine has recognized the jurisdiction of the International Criminal Court, whose jurisdiction includes the crime of genocide. The Office of the Prosecutor has been examining the situation for 7 years and found evidence of crimes, but has never said a word about genocide. In short, Russia's claim is that a genocide has occurred under the noses of diligent UN fact-finders, OSCE monitors, and ICC prosecutors. It defies credulity. I turn finally to the present. For months, the world watched Russia mass its forces along Ukraine's borders. Yet as recently as 31 January 2022, at a meeting of the UN Security Council, the permanent representative of Russia reacted angrily to suggestions that Russia planned to invade. He mockingly called on the United States to, quote, "show us at least some evidence, apart from bogus narratives fabricated in their own heads, that Russia intends to attack Ukraine." That was a lie. Little more than 3 weeks later, the same permanent representative would justify his country's invasion based on claims of genocide. Another lie. To the end, Russia appeared desperate to manufacture a casus belli. But plans to stage false flag attacks were exposed. Shelling was intensified along the contact line to provoke retaliation, but Ukraine would not oblige. On 17 February, a horrific act of violence did occur in Luhansk Oblast when a kindergarten was attacked. The OSCE called this indiscriminate shelling. Yet the kindergarten was in government-controlled territory. As Human Rights Watch reported from the ground, the attack appeared to have been committed, quote, by Russia-backed armed groups, end quote. Russia thus found itself eager to invade Ukraine, but lacking any conceivable justification. So Russia settled on its lie. President Putin would dramatically trumpet his accusation of genocide. Russia would recognize the DPR and LPR as independent states on the basis of the genocide they allegedly faced. And Russia would invade Ukraine for the express purpose of protecting the people of Donbass from this fabricated genocide and to punish the supposed génocidaire. With the groundwork laid, the claim of genocide invoked, Russia proceeded to unleash the military aggression that is now horrifying the world. Madam President, members of the court, as we speak, Russian speakers in Ukraine are indeed under attack. Ukrainians are under attack regardless of what language they speak. They are under attack from Russia. Médecins Sans Frontières reported 2 days ago that, quote, the humanitarian situation in Mariupol is catastrophic, end quote. The predominantly Russian-speaking city of Kharkiv is under barbaric attack, with cluster munitions being launched indiscriminately at residential areas. According to a UN report, in the first 6 days of Russia's war, there were nearly as many civilian casualties as in the last 5 years of the Donbass conflict. And that is just confirmed casualties, with the UN recognizing that the real number is much higher and climbing every day. Yet Russia has the gall to massacre Ukrainians and call it protection. Russia has the gall to attempt to overthrow a democratically elected government and call it punishment of Nazis. Russia has the gall to accuse Ukraine of a fake genocide and to rain very real destruction and terror on the 44 million inhabitants of a sovereign state. Madam President, the facts are undeniable. Russia's allegations of genocide are false and outrageous. I respectfully ask that you call on Ms. Marnichik, who will explain the plausibility of the rights Ukraine asserts under the Genocide Convention.
I thank Mr. Zients, and I now invite Ms. Marnichik to take the floor. You have the floor, Ms. Cheek.
Madam President, distinguished members of the court, it is an honor to appear before you again on behalf of Ukraine. I will discuss the rights that Ukraine seeks to preserve through its request for provisional measures. As stated in this court's order on provisional measures in the Gambia versus Myanmar, and here I substitute Ukraine for the Gambia, quote, at this stage of the proceedings, the court is not called upon to determine definitively whether the rights which Ukraine wishes to see protected exist. It need only decide whether the rights claimed by Ukraine on the merits and for which it is seeking protection are plausible. In this case, the rights asserted by Ukraine are plausible, as they are, to again quote the court in Belgium v. Senegal, grounded in a possible interpretation of the Convention. Indeed, the rights that Ukraine asserts are grounded in a good faith interpretation of the Convention, while Russia's use of the Genocide Convention to try to mask its unlawful invasion of Ukraine can only be described as proceeding in bad faith in violation of the Convention. This morning, I will first describe the rights and obligations that exist under the Genocide Convention. Second, I will explain that there is no plausible evidence of genocide in the Donbass region of Ukraine. Third, and finally, I will elaborate on Ukraine's right to demand good faith performance and to not be subjected to abuse or misuse of the Genocide Convention. So let me first describe generally the rights and obligations under the Genocide Convention. Article 1 of the Genocide Convention confirms that genocide is a crime under international law, which the contracting parties, quote, undertake to prevent and punish. This court has interpreted Article 1 observing in the Bosnia genocide case that while the Genocide Convention, quote, does not expressis verbis require states to refrain from themselves committing genocide, that is precisely what the duty to prevent genocide necessarily implies. The court went on to further explain the obligation to prevent genocide as follows, quote, a state's obligation to prevent and the corresponding duty to act arise at the instant that the state learns of, or should normally have learned of, the existence of a serious risk that genocide will be committed. From that moment onwards, if the state has available to it means likely to have a deterrent effect, or those suspected of preparing genocide or reasonably suspected of harboring specific intent, dolus specialis, it is under a duty to make such use of these means as the circumstances permit. Thus, consistent with the object and purpose of the Genocide Convention, to liberate mankind from the odious scourge of genocide, Article 1 includes both an obligation not to commit genocide, as well as a duty to act to prevent and punish genocide. With regard to the duty to act, where there is a serious risk of genocide, states should take preventative measures likely to have a deterrent effect. Further, under Article 4 of the Convention, quote, persons committing genocide or any of the other acts enumerated in Article 3 shall be punished, whether they are constitutionally responsible leaders, public officials, or private individuals. Russia has acted inconsistently with these obligations and duties. It has fabricated a claim of genocide in the Donbass region of eastern Ukraine. It has then justified its military invasion of the entire country as the prevention of that fabricated genocide and as punishment of the alleged perpetrators of genocide through so-called denazification. It has not taken preventive measures likely to have a deterrent effect. As this court explained in its 1951 advisory opinion on the reservations to the Convention on Genocide, the Convention was manifestly adopted for a purely humanitarian and civilizing purpose. It is indeed difficult to imagine a convention that might have this dual character to a greater degree, since its object, on the one hand, is to safeguard the very existence of certain human groups, and on the other, to confirm and endorse the most elementary principles of morality. In such a convention, the contracting states do not have any interests of their own. They merely have one and all a common interest, namely the accomplishment of those high purposes which are the raison d'etre of the Convention. Consequently, in a convention of this type, one cannot speak to individual advantages or disadvantages to states or to the maintenance of a perfect contractual balance between rights and duties. The high ideals which inspired the Convention provide...
And so we come out of the ICC hearing that Russia-Ukraine matter. We'll give you a summary of that a little bit later on.